Claws of Awaji is Assassin's Creed Shadows' first expansion. I was provided with a review copy and got the chance to finish it. This video won't have story spoilers for the DLC itself, but it will for the end of the base game, as this expansion is a direct continuation of the story from where Shadows ended. So if you don't want the ending of Shadows spoiled, there's your warning. Claws of Awaji was developed by Ubisoft Bordeaux, of course the creators of Assassin's Creed Mirage, which is also getting a DLC soon, ironically enough. That wasn't on my 2025 bingo card, that's for sure, but hey, I'm not complaining. I was under the impression that Ubisoft Bordeaux was making a new Assassin's Creed game, since that was rumored a while back, but it might have actually just been this DLC. I really hope that's not the case, because I would like to see them make another traditional Assassin's Creed game. That studio in particular is really good at listening to community feedback, and I'd like to see what they do with more time and budget than what they were given with Mirage. But anyways, that's not the topic of this video. We're here to talk about Claws of Awaji. Like I said, this is a direct continuation of Shadows' ending, which was quite open-ended. It wasn't a very conclusive or satisfying ending, especially when it comes to Naoe's side of the story. It ends with her discovering her mother Suyu may still be alive, and wanting to search for her, along with the final Imperial regalia. And Yasuke is on his own little quest to hunt down Templars. So, with that premise in mind, the DLC brings them to the nearby island of Awaji. There's some fresh ideas in the expansion, the new weapon type plays differently from all the others in the game, there's this very creative Metal Gear Solid inspired boss fight, there's some traps thrown into some of the stealth level design, and the island of Awaji as a whole is far more hostile than the mainland of the base game. There's some creative ideas in there. The problems I have with Claws of Awaji are mostly the same problems I had with the base game. I still think the writing leaves a lot to be desired. It still has that non-linear story structure where you can do big chunks of the missions in whatever order you want, and it has most of the same repetitive side content. I'll get more into detail on all of that, but my overall takeaway is if you enjoyed Shadows, you'll very likely enjoy this and appreciate some of the new ideas they introduce. If you don't like Shadows, this isn't going to change your mind. It's more of the same with some fresh little twists. The biggest addition to gameplay is Naoe's new weapon type, the bow staff. And there's actually a new bow staff enemy type as well that can be pretty challenging to deal with. Yasuke doesn't get a new weapon type, he only gets one new ability for each pre-existing weapon he already had, which is nice, but it's not the same as getting a new weapon. Again, it kind of feels like Yasuke is getting the short end of the stick here. I played most of the base game as Naoe anyway, and this DLC is more focused on her story, but ideally in a dual protagonist game you want to feel incentivized to play as both characters, even if one suits your playstyle better. I'd like more reasons to play as Yasuke, but when Naoe already fits my playstyle better, and she's the one getting a new weapon, I don't feel very encouraged to do so except in very specific situations. That aside, the bow staff is the best of Naoe's weapon types in the game. It has the best special assassination and more depth to its attacks than all of the base game weapons, as you can do different forms of posture attacks for different situations. Neutral posture attacks are for pushing enemies back, high posture cancels enemy attacks and staggers them, and low posture knocks them over, opening them up for a ground attack, and you can do all of them in light or heavy form. The heavy posture attacks take longer, making them a little more risky as you can get hit during the animation, but conversely they have increased effect. So you technically have 6 different forms of posture attacks that you can mix into combat depending on the scenario, compared to the base game weapons 2 that just have neutral posture attacks. Additionally, it has an ability called Perfect Flow, where if you delay and time your inputs properly in between strikes, you'll gain adrenaline and deal more damage. It encourages you to be more intentional and pace out your attacks rather than button spam, bringing more of a sense of rhythm to the combat. The finishing animations have more variety than the original weapons as well. A sizable critique for Shadows' combat was how there were only a couple finishers for each weapon type, and how they got repetitive and boring quickly. Naoe's weapons only have 2 finishers, some like Yasuke's katana and Naginata have 3, while the new bow staff has 5. The bow staff's special assassination is a chain assassination where you can go into slow motion and seamlessly move from target to target within a certain range. chaining up to 3 or even 4 enemies if you use the engraving from the new Bowmaster outfit, not unlike Batman Arkham's multi-fear takedowns, Ghost of Tsushima's chain assassination, or even like Assassin's Creed Jade's. It's fun to use, the animations look great, and this is what we wanted Assassin's Focus to look like in Mirage instead of the Animus teleporting effect. Which makes me wonder, since this expansion was developed by Ubisoft Bordeaux, if they pocketed that feedback from back then and saw an opportunity to give that type of chain assassination to us here. Obviously they couldn't do it in Mirage since the game was already so close to being released, but it's nice to finally have this form of chain assassination in one of the main games and not just an unreleased mobile title. Shadows does have a chain assassination of sorts already, with the engraving that has Nawe throw a kunai at a nearby enemy after an assassination. It was originally very inconsistent, as I mentioned in my review of Shadows, but they did end up fixing that in an update. The bow staff chain assassinations are still far stronger and more fun to use, plus you can still have both of them equipped at the same time if you like. Unfortunately, Nawe won't throw a kunai after a bow staff chain assassination though, otherwise you could chain together like 5 kills at a time, which would look really cool. But the bow staff does bring a much needed shakeup to gameplay. It's still a bummer to me that Yasuke didn't get a new weapon as well, but at least we got a weapon that brings some more depth to combat and stealth with its new posture attacks and special assassination respectively. However, probably my favorite part of this entire DLC is the Nowaki boss fight. It's inspired by some of the stealth boss fights from Metal Gear Solid 3 and 5, like the Fear, the End, and Quiet's boss fight, where you have to sneak and crawl around this very creepy and eerie atmosphere as Nawe, while Nowaki, a creepy villain in her own right, tries to snipe you with a teppo. There's tons of traps you need to avoid or disarm, and Nowaki has all these straw decoys set up around the area, forcing you to discover the real one by listening for the direction of her voice and using eagle vision when you get close enough in this big game of cat and mouse. It's immersive, it's tense, it's the most fun I had in the DLC, and really unlike anything we've had in Assassin's Creed before. There have been some stealth boss fights, like in Unity with the King of Beggars and the final one against Sherman, but nothing quite like this. Assassin's Creed has never really been known for its boss fights, but I think this is one of the most enjoyable ones in a while. Not that that's really saying a whole lot, but it's a nice change of pace from the standard one-on-one combat bosses, which there are still a few of in Claws of Awaji. The other substantial new additions come with the island of Awaji itself. It's a relatively small, dense map, especially compared to mainland Japan in the base game, but where it really differentiates itself from the mainland is in the sense of hostility and danger you feel when traversing it. You're completely isolated on this island that is firmly ruled over by Kimura Yukari and her faction, the Sanzoku Ippa. Nawe and Yasuke are fishes out of water here. From the moment you arrive, people seem standoffish and don't want to talk to you. You'll frequently be ambushed when just traversing the roads with tripwires and shinobi lying in wait. Civilian and merchant NPCs who serve as spies for the Sanzoku Ippa will randomly attack you out and about, giving this sense that there are always eyes watching you. And when you use your scouts to search for an objective on the map, they can be discovered, which increases the enemy presence in the area you've just searched, bringing a drawback to using scouts as opposed to searching for the location yourself. In castles and other restricted areas, there's a couple wrenches thrown into the stealth level design, like tripwires that either inflict poison or sound off bells and alert nearby enemies to your presence. These are placed in strategic areas like crawl spaces, cracks you would ordinarily move through in walls, or even on the side of structures you'd climb up. Chests and rations can be trapped as well so that when you go to loot it, you're hit by an explosion of poison. Sometimes enemies will literally be pretending to be an inanimate suit of armor and attack you when you get close and least expect it. All of this requires a little more environmental awareness on the part of the player, and an extra obstacle to account for in stealth situations. These changes, while small, create a bit of a different tone and atmosphere from mainland Japan, which is important because the rest of it isn't very different from the base game's world. It looks rather similar visually, lots of the same assets and environments with dense forests, a couple large castles, and a few bustling towns. Unfortunately, the parkour design isn't any better than the base game in those towns. It's still lots of low, one-story structures, and the castles were never great for parkour to begin with. While the parkour improvements they have made in post-launch have been nice, and I certainly appreciate Ubisoft Quebec listening to community feedback on that, I think there's only so much that can be done within the constraining parkour design of Shadows' world. Another element of Awaji I find disappointingly similar to the base game is in its side content and activities. Things like looking for lost scrolls, honoring shrines, Kujikiri, kata, the contracts, more castles full of daisho to clear. Those are all back and pretty much exactly the same. The parkour trails are a little different as you get a couple new ones that have landscape sumie at the end as a reward. It still works exactly the same, just for landscapes and not animals, but there's some cool sights to behold. I enjoyed some of these activities and mini-games in the base game initially, but they were already getting repetitive after doing them dozens of times across nearly 100 hours, so doing the same things again in the DLC felt very tedious. I understand DLCs are more limited on time and budget, so there's of course going to be some crossover with the same content, but I was hoping for some more new fresh activities to liven things up. The dynamic events are also back, where you can stop and help a civilian NPC in need randomly in the world, in exchange for a rumor or a scout recharge. But I kid you not, I got the same event copied and pasted like 4 different times, where this fisherman wants help retrieving some cargo, so you dive into the water, you get it, and give it to him. Very simple, barely any gameplay involved, and this repeated for me several times. Same dialogue and everything. It was barely interesting the first time, it certainly wasn't after the 4th. There are a couple side quests, but they're lacking in interesting gameplay and story substance. One of them has a former Ashigaru challenging you to a friendly sparring match because he misses battle. So, you spar him and that's it, that's the whole quest. They're just very brief and surface level. Again, I think a lot of Shadows' side quests in general pale in comparison to the likes of Origins and Odyssey that had these longer, sometimes multi-mission, narrative-driven side quests. The organization circles full of targets to assassinate are back. I'm pretty sick of these too, I'm not gonna lie. I like assassinating targets, I'm an assassin at heart, what can I say? But there were already so many of these in the base game that it just gets stale really quickly, especially when there's hardly any story to them. So like I said, I appreciated some of the new additions and trying to make Awaji feel more dangerous than the base game's open world, but I was hoping for more interesting new things to do within said world, instead of the same small handful of activities I already spent hours upon hours completing. And similarly, the story brings in some refreshing creative ideas, but ultimately still has a lot of the same issues as Shadows' main narrative. It kind of feels like they front-loaded the budget into the beginning of the expansion, with first this 2.5D interactive puppet show you get to play as you get the history of Awaji, learn about the main antagonists, and then later some missions where Naoe and Yasuke are actually working together at the same time in close proximity. Something the base game didn't really do much of, which I always found odd for a dual protagonist game. The puppet show is actually really cool. It's designed like the set of a play with the painted backdrops and red handkerchiefs as fake blood. There's some light gameplay with a puzzle, some combat, and even some 2.5D stealth, which took me back to Assassin's Creed Chronicles a bit. The gameplay in it is very basic, but it's aesthetically really cool and unique for the series, and a clever way to deliver all the necessary exposition and backstory for the expansion. Unfortunately, it's mostly downhill from there. With this being a condensed 10-hour DLC, I was really hoping it would just be a normal linear story. No filler, none of this do the missions and take down targets in whatever order you want, because then the characters aren't allowed to grow and the story can't meaningfully progress until it goes back to being linear, since it has to account for people playing the missions in different orders, and that doesn't typically happen until towards the end of these stories. But that's not the case. It follows a very similar structure to the base game, where the beginning and end are linear, then you have the entire middle portion to just be played in whatever order you want. And I was frankly just flat out bored for a vast majority of that middle portion. It's not just the structure that contributes to that, it's the writing. The cutscenes are still just lifeless 90% of the time. I played in Japanese and English. I think the Japanese performances are way better, but I wanted to try English as well to see if the performances had improved. They did not. Most of the antagonists have very shallow characterization and motives. Nowaki is the best one to me just because of her very creepy personality and dark backstory you get to learn a little bit about in some optional dialogue. Plus, she has that boss fight. Don't get me wrong, she's not a great antagonist, but I think people are likely to remember her the most, since the rest are so bland. With that being said, and without spoiling anything, The ending does provide closure and feels more like a legitimate ending than what we got in the base game. It is almost entirely about Naoe's arc. Yasuke gets a little here and there, but he's in more of a supporting role narratively. Hopefully he gets the focus and spotlight in future expansions, if there are any planned. That's not actually confirmed yet, because his story got very interesting at the end of Shadows, and I'd like to see more of the Assassin and Templar conflict going forward. I don't like the idea of saving the true ending of the game for a DLC though. If you're buying a full single-player game, you'd expect it to have a complete ending with all the major plot threads being resolved. Having to play a DLC to get closure on the ending cliffhangers is a little ridiculous to me. They did the same thing with Odyssey's Modern Day, wrapping it up in the Fate of Atlantis expansion. Sure, you could always add or flesh things out from the main narrative in an expansion, like the hidden ones in Origins, Jack the Ripper in Syndicate, Dead Kings in Unity, even Ghost of Tsushima's Iki Island is a good example of that. But having to play a DLC to get that closure from the base game's main narrative doesn't sit right with me. Again, like I said in my review of Shadows, the storytelling is the single biggest problem with Assassin's Creed as a whole right now. It's on a massive cold streak going back to at least Valhalla in my opinion. I really want to see this improve soon. It's just not going to happen with Shadows. I think Project Hexe is probably our best bet at the moment, being rumored to be a semi-linear, condensed, narrative-focused game, and written by the fan favorite Darby McDevitt, of course. Hopefully that can bring us back to at least where we were before. Or, now hear me out guys, a Junjiro spin-off. I really like you, Junjiro, don't get me wrong, but if that were to ever happen, I'm retiring from Assassin's Creed. Anyways, I'm getting a little off topic, I'm sorry. Claws of Awaji has some fun new gameplay mechanics, refreshing little spins on pre-existing systems, and a great boss fight, but it's got some significant flaws, with lots of the same boring, repetitive side content, and the story, well, let's not go down that rabbit hole again. It's clear this was made for those who already enjoyed Shadows and giving those people more, not so much addressing some of the larger criticisms of the game and trying to make sweeping changes. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some ideas from this DLC pop up in future Assassin's Creed titles. We need more stealth boss fights, that's for sure. If there's any positive takeaway that could be applied to the future of the series from this DLC, that would be it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'm sorry once again for my terribly inconsistent upload schedule lately. Party City just won't leave me in peace, but that's gotta be so confusing for someone who doesn't regularly watch this channel. Anyways, I'm gonna shut up now. Have a good day, everybody.